Hello and welcome to In Conversation with the history holders of the American Dance Therapy Association, a project made possible by the Marian Chace Foundation. My name is Dr. Jacelyn Biondo. When I first conceived of making these videos, I hoped to capture the words of the women who studied with the firsts in our field: Marian Chace, Trudy Schoop, Mary Whitehouse, Alma Hawkins, Blanche Evan, and Lillian Espinack. What culminated in the process was an opportunity to have these women share their stories and their memories in their own words, and to capture these parts of history for future generations. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy our conversations. So today I am joined by Dr. Tina Stromsted. Dr. Stromsted, thank you so much for being with us today to talk about your experiences. It's delightful to have you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm really honored.
Of course, of course. So to get us started in our conversation, I would love for you to just share a little bit about with whom and where you first studied dance therapy.
Gosh. Well, I feel like it has to kind of take me back in
Sure.
time to how I got interested in it. And I think this may be true for all of us, that there are times in our early life that call for dance, that draw us back to one of the earliest forms of healing in all time, that the shamans used and the earliest doctors, all of those people, communities in healing. And in my own case, there were troubles in the household where I grew up. My parents divorced and remarried, and there was a lot of tension going on. And it was expressed kind of above the table and below the table. And this will come back to Trudy at a certain point, where above the table we had these intellectual conversations. My parents were, they were Ivy League, they were interested in ideas, politics, which was good, books, culture. So all that was very interesting in a way. But as a child, I was more interested in what was going on under the table, where there was a lot of fidgeting happening. You can imagine with the
Mm-hmm.
toes, the family dinner table, right? Everything goes on there. The toes, the feet, people wringing napkins, holding our knees, holding our breath, having moments of expression. And so as a child, I would sometimes just dip under the table, to have a look at what was going on, and sometimes to pass through to put my dishes in the dishwasher. But that was the world I was more interested in. It was the emotional, gestural, feeling world that had no words. It wasn't being represented above the table. And I think partly that was because my biological mother, who left, was very emotional. So my father did a 180, how we do sometimes, and married someone he thought was more of an intellectual. So the family kind of went that way, and feeling went under the table. And so after dinner, clearing the table, getting everything in the dishwasher, I'd go across the street to the alfalfa and cornfields and just start to turn and spin and find my feet on the earth, take my shoes off, and just experience the trees, the birds, the tall grasses, the alfalfa, the corn, the songs of the animals, and just feel like I was at one with everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I just lost track of the things that were troubling. I think they just drained out of my body into the earth, Mother Earth, who was big enough to take them and compost them to help me. And in those moments, I just felt this wholeness, this soulfulness that Trudy also brought on in her work, which I can come back to a little bit later. But she was very interested in dancing flowers, dancing trees, dancing fish, dancing amoebas, dancing ourselves all the way up through our four-leggeds to finally two-leggeds into human form. And so that archetypal aspect, that timeless, spaceless quality was something that helped me connect back to my own soul. And then I would come in, and we had this back room in the house that my mother had built. It was actually a big dance room. And I would put on records. I'm dating myself, but Joni Mitchell, Simon and Garfunkel, Crosby, Stills and Nash, people I loved. And I would play them and just start dancing. And then my sisters would come, particularly the two next to me in age, and put their noses and fingertips on the glass door. And at a certain point when I'd be moving, I would see them and I would just wave them in, and we would do our little groups. And I thought, these were like my first dance therapy groups. I didn't know anything about it, but I needed it. And they needed it. And we felt much better afterwards. We would move and sing and feel connected to something deeper and to each other. So a lot happened after that, but what can I say? I studied I was studying dance in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I lived at that time, and also doing some teaching. And I found myself kind of what I learned later to call witnessing, what we do in our work, holding space and being as attuned and present with the students as I could be, and getting really interested in how their movements would be different from the ones I was teaching them in modern dance or in Afro-Haitian dance or, whatever we might have been doing. And, as you know, if you do a movement, you can do it this way, or you can do it this way, or you can do it this way, or you can do it this way, and there was something of people's essence that was coming through. It was like that Leonard Cohen song where, it's through the cracks that the light comes in. And so I would pause and say, wow, that's so beautiful, or that's amazing. Could you try doing that again? And then they would do it and it would become more amplified. And their full-on expression would start to come out. And so after class, when we had 15 minutes to change out of leotards and whatever, sweats and whatever we were wearing into our street clothes, people would start saying, what are we doing? And I'd say, well, we're dancing. And they'd say, well, it seems like something more than that. And I didn't know anything about dance therapy. And I think this is true for a lot of us, and even people who don't call themselves dance therapists, that it's so profoundly healing that something else starts to happen. And so they started telling me their life stories during those 15 minutes. And I just thought, how do I hold these people? How do I hold these stories, with the respect they deserve, the time they deserve, and see where they might want to go? And so I started volunteering at McLean's psychiatric hospital just outside of Boston, working with patients using movement and poetry and art and taking them into nature, because I knew that that's where the gods lived, or that's how I felt. And I found a psychiatrist there who was willing to let me try. So that was a wonderful experience. And then I thought, I really need more psychological chops. I really need to understand better what I'm trying to support in people. And I could see that they wanted to come, that things were happening, but I wanted to understand it better. And my conversations with him were really helpful. So actually, I met Norma Canner in Cambridge, and
Mhm.
I was able to do it was after the work at Maclean's, but I was able to do some workshops with her, which were a complete delight. What a spirit she was. And and then I met Myron Chace, who was Wilhelm Reich's secretary and biographer. He wrote
Mhm.
Fury on Earth, a wonderful biography of Wilhelm Reich. And then I said, I'm thinking of moving to California because when I visited friends here, I could see that more than what I was aware of in Boston, they were working with dreams. They were experimenting with embodied psychotherapy. Um, there was there was a lot of exploration going on at the Esalen Institute and in many other places around here, and I thought, I think that's where I need to go. Um, so Myron told me about Stanley Kellerman, who worked with Alexander Lowen in the Reichian tradition, and I began studying with him, and I did that until he passed a couple of years ago from my 20s up until now. And he also taught with Joseph Campbell, the mythologist. So we were getting some of the Jungian work and some of the Reichian work, some of the creative imagination and the arts, and deep, deep grounding biological work in the body. Tamara Greenberg is a dance therapist who worked with Stanley Kellerman. So I worked with her as my first therapist in dance therapy. And she said, why don't you study dance therapy? It just seems so natural for you. And I said, what is that? Does it exist? She said,
Mhm.
oh, yeah. So then I looked at, Antioch and a number of schools, and many of them were closing with the Reagan era. He was just taking money away from mental health. But JFK continued a clinical psychology and a dance therapy program under Susan Wallach. And I studied, so I studied dance therapy there. And then I continued. I met Mary Whitehouse briefly here in San Francisco because she passed shortly after I came from the East Coast. And then I studied very deeply with Janet Adler for
Mhm.
9 years. She started a training program here, and then I did some assisting with her here and in Europe. And then with Joan Chartereau, who taught me authentic movement, who's been a friend and mentor and colleague for 40 years, and we've done a lot of teaching together. There have been many other people who've influenced my path, I think, which is true for many of us, many teachers,
Mhm.
many good mothers, many good fathers. I
Mhm.
think we need as many as possible. Um, so that's some of my background in that area.
Can you get us to the pathway that led you then into studying with or meeting Trudy Schoop?
Tamara knew about Trudy, and Joan really knew about Trudy.
Right.
And I wish she were here. She's having some health situations, so she's not able to be. But I'll tell some stories for her from time to time, I think, just to be
Yeah, I
sure.
would love that. Mhm.
Okay, great. What I didn't mention was that I needed to also experience the reality in the body without words because of my intellectual parents.
Mhm.
And so I also did yoga and Zen Buddhism to get quiet because as a dancer, I didn't know enough about being quiet and sitting still.
Mhm.
And then I started studying mime with Leonard Pitt,
Mhm.
who studied with Etienne Ducroux, Marcel Marceau's teacher in Paris. And so he had a mime school here in Berkeley. So I was very interested in that, in character study,
Mhm.
and in conveying things without words. So Joan said, Tina, you have to meet Trudy. She's a comic genius, and she does it through mime and through dance.
Mhm.
So Trudy, who was living in the LA area in Van Nuys, came up here on a number of occasions and offered workshops that a whole bunch of us couldn't wait to get to. I mean, there were
Mhm.
usually at least 50 people in the room.
Mhm.
And she would be there, bang, with her drum, and she would get us into repetition, rhythm, and begin to work her magic by, among other things, having us explore polarities.
Mhm.
So, for example, my polarity of intellectual talk above the table and what is going on under the table, the fountain of feelings there. She was all over it. And she would say, walk with a loosey goosey upper body and stiff legs. So we'd have to get across the room doing that, or be, really bombastic
Mhm.
and then be kind of shy with your feet pointing toward each other. So we would do all these goofy things with her, and we would just end up in peals of laughter. And while we were doing that, pockets of suffering, pockets of memory, pockets of why we got so stiff or why we closed in would come out. And she would say, keep going with that. I have family in Switzerland, so Switzerland is really familiar to me. And she would say, "Yeah, keep going with that, more like this." And she would kind of bug you, until you really went into it. And she'd say, "Very good," like this, and then she would go on. And so what was really trying to happen that was in seed form or was frozen, that may have been frozen for a really long time, would start to come out. And she was there to receive it
Mhm.
and even to help us play with it. So we could, as the trauma community now calls it, people studying somatic experiencing and other things, we were resourced because we were in a safe environment and we were playing with
Mhm.
what had been so difficult, to the point where we could laugh at ourselves, really,
Mhm.
and with each other. So we were supported in community.
Mhm.
Everybody could recognize these profoundly human feelings. And by laughing at ourselves some of the time, we would cry. I mean, everything would happen. When you can laugh at something or let yourself cry and grieve, as you remember you're much bigger than that one feeling,
Mhm.
and that you can transform it. It begins to mix with its opposite. Um, and in fact, I'm also a Jungian analyst as well as a dance movement therapist, because I love the depth that he brought. And Trudy's very Jungian in her own way. Jung talked about the importance of holding the tension
Mhm.
between the opposites. He called that the transcendent function. That through holding that tension, um, which can feel unbearable because your personality wants to be one way and your unconscious says, "Oh no, what about this?" Right?
Mhm.
A third way can come in that we couldn't have guessed. That's
Mhm.
like a new birth. It's something bigger than the either or. It's a both and more than.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
Trudy was a genius at helping us
Mhm.
find that. Um, there's so much that I could say about her, but I want to pause and give
Mhm.
you a chance.
Yeah. Well, I'm my brain is really still in this space of image that you set us up with,
Okay.
right? Um, I can very clearly see the table. I can very clearly see one thing here, another thing below, and then I clearly see you spinning in the elements, right? And then when you talk about Trudy, it's almost like a perfect marriage of what your childhood experience was and your desire for the nonverbal and your innate understanding that I think many of us as dance therapists have of there's something much more profound happening here than we always name. And then the way you speak about Trudy and the polarities, do this with your upper, do this with your lower. You're like, I've been doing this my whole life,
Exactly.
right? Or
Help me with
witnessing,
this.
or right. And then just the nonverbals and the character study and all of this, it really, Tina, sounds like a perfect match. And then when you talk about the Jungian component, the thing that I first popped into my head is Israel Stam's dialectical edge of which way do you go? Do you go into the known, or do you go into the unknown, right? And do we have to burn down to allow for growth? Right. Yes. Yes. So I'm really, um, I'm, yes, I could say a lot. I don't want to say a lot. And I feel like you are also flowing into the next question without my needing to even ask it. So I will kind of harness a little bit of, um, when you got into that space of working with Trudy, and when I hear it, it sounds like such a perfect pairing. Um, what was that experience like for you to work with her in that way?
It was playful, it was deep, it was full of imagination. Um, I just felt like I had this sense of being received by her,
Mhm.
that she respected everyone, no matter what they were experiencing, what was going on. And you can see that in Claudia's film,
Mhm.
Come Dance with Me,
Mhm.
in her work with hospitalized people who were struggling with so many things. And she would say, it's important to respect them. Don't feel sorry for them. Here they are with everything they have. And she said, and we will be learning from them and from each other, and we will have a lot of laughs along the way. She was less than 5 feet tall. I mean, she was tiny. And I'm not very big. I'm like 5'3", but I felt like I was towering over her. So she was like an imp or a gnome or an elf in a way. She was sort of magical to me.
Mm.
I guess I haven't mentioned, I interviewed her for my master's thesis, which was called Dream Dancing. It was in 1983, and I was talking with people who were working with dreams in the body because there wasn't very much that was written about it. And another thing I did as a child was I kept dream journals from when I was very young because there wasn't really anyone to talk with about it, but I knew how important dreams were to me, that my unconscious was trying to help, was trying to bring through things that I didn't really know about. So I would dance the characters from my dreams to try to get a feeling for some of these different qualities and capacities and wisdom ways. What would they have to say? What could they do that I was too afraid to do, or I didn't know how to do, or I'd never done before? And when I interviewed Trudy, the first thing she said to me, it almost broke my heart. She said, I don't think I'm the right person for you to talk to because from my perspective, and I can't do her accent, really well, but I can just sort of hear her. Dreams are no different from fairy tales and myths and the imagination. And I said, I totally agree. And she said, okay, then let's go, like this. So we went right into the interview, and she said, for me, dreams working with the unconscious is as real as this table. And she went, and she just banged on the table. So that was another deep connection for me. What she would call ordinary daily reality, where we're very time bound. It's like Chronos time, the clock. Tick, 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 got to get it done. I walk like this. I'm this kind of person. I have to rush to the bank or the train or the da, 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 da. And it's kind of regulated and sort of known. And of course we need to do this, and it's quite grounded in a certain way, unless we do too much, which we can do. But then there's what she called the ur. And the ur was my experience of dancing in the fields. It's timeless, spaceless, it's eternal.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the Sufis do that. I didn't know that till later. They spin
Mm-hmm.
and they feel the still point, in the center of the whirling.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so she would invite, we'd get stuck in our polarities and things, and she'd have us kind of imitate each other and then imitate our best version of ourselves as best we could. And I was doing that when I worked with patients in Boston. They would leave Project Place, this counseling center where I was working, and I would say, I'm not sure what's happening for this person. And so I would go and sit in their chair, I guess this was in the mid 70s, and sit as closely to the way they were sitting as I could. And then, you know how this is, I'd get this upwelling of maybe something about what they were feeling. And Trudy was all over that as a mime. And so we would try things on to get a better sense of embodied empathy with someone else. And it was done with permission, not ridicule, but finding one another, resonating with what's it like to be in this body, or this body, or this body, or this body. And then she would take us into archetypal space and say, you're the only person on the planet, and you witness the first sunrise. And it's like, wow. I mean, it just opens up all the space in the cells, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then you hear the surf and you see the ocean for the first time, you know. And then there was this huge sense of flow that would come in, and it would be pretty hard to hold on to your tension or to feel like a separate self. And then she would say, and now the sky is beginning to darken, the clouds are forming, and you hear the first thunderclap and lightning. And we were like, boom, we were on the floor, we were like this.
Mm-hmm.
And so we became very alive. And she would say this, I think in her book, she says something like, I don't want to tranquilize people.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the era of drugs and medication, which were helping people, but they didn't know yet how much to give them. And sometimes it was too much. And some of it was before medication.
Mm-hmm.
She'd say, I want to help them find their vitality, their whole self, their unity. Yeah. So these are some of my other experiences of, for the bundle of energy she was this enormous presence and person, and I just always felt delight around her. She was
Mm-hmm.
very serious about her work and about helping people. She always came in and she would say, I don't really have a method. I don't really have a technique because it could get in the way. I just want to be as present as I can be, and that's how I'll get to know you,
Mm-hmm.
where we need to go.
Mm-hmm.
What an invitation.
What an invitation, and what an important piece to pass on, right? Of when we're learning, we often want to know, how do we do it? How does it work? How do we get there?
Yeah.
Right? And the answer is just, I want to be as present as possible so that I can understand where this goes, what happens, what exists,
Yeah.
what the potentials are, what our relationship is, how we collaborate, all of the things.
It's like the seed is right here. It was like talking with you a little bit before we started, and just like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, Italy, or oh, our
Mm-hmm.
grandmothers, or oh,
Mm-hmm.
that gets to grow, and then you see where it goes. So
Mm-hmm.
she would say, I don't come in with an agenda except to be with you
Mm-hmm.
find where the seeds are, something soulful,
Mm-hmm.
and see if I can support that. And she would
Mm-hmm.
really play with people.
Mm.
Yeah.
Is there something particular, or like a little kind of seed, plant, stem, root, about her teaching specifically that stands out to you, Tina?
I think her imagination,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I mean, she took us through all the senses in the body, seeing, hearing, touch, taste, everything. So we became more and more alive. She took us through space, all the way through the room. How are you going to get across the room with different attitudes?
Mm-hmm.
She always brought in the imagination because she felt that that was something that, can get squeezed and minimized by oppressive cultural norms and by oppressive family norms that get passed down inadvertently through multi-generational trauma. And she had a fair amount of trauma, which I think would be good to mention because it's how she got out of it, which is how
Mm-hmm.
she became a dance therapist eventually. I think many people know parts, maybe much of this story, but I'd like to mention it to honor her in that. What I will say is that she kept saying, if you can open to your imagination and to the unconscious through dreams, you're not limited anymore, and you can recover messages that are trying to come through from the unconscious. And of course, Jung talked a lot about dreams and
Mm-hmm.
what he called the collective unconscious, which is all of our memories, back from when we were sea creatures, back through our ancestors, of all kinds around the world to the present time, that we have access to that kind of collective memory. And it has, yes, trauma elements that we have to continue to work out. And we see that in our social activist movements now, thank goodness, coming up, needing attention, consciousness, and work, a lot of healing work. And we also have a lot of gifts, energy that gets buried if we just have to be this kind of person. And so Jung would say, a dream you don't work with is like a letter you don't open. They're still helpful, but to bring consciousness into an equal relationship with the unconscious is where so much can happen. And to
Mm-hmm.
do that when you're in the body. So Trudy said, let your dreams have legs, embody them, live them. And she would create dance, theater, productions, sort of psychodramas. So sometimes we would work with dream themes in the workshop. Or she was telling me in my interviews with her for my thesis, with the people she worked with in psychiatric hospitals, she would say, "Are you dreaming?" And they'd say, "Oh yeah," And there's a good one in her film where she says, "Have you ever dreamed of someone chasing you?" Which is a very popular, common dream. And oh yeah, what happened? What did you want to do? So instead of freezing, they would start to run with
Mm-hmm.
her encouragement. They would open up, and she would help them create whole theater productions for the rest of the hospital,
Mm-hmm.
so that people who were cut off would work as a team. People who'd been very isolated, and they would work with their own dream material. So I remember many things, but here's a little moment of working with the imagination with Trudy. Cross the room in the dance studio, and in the middle of the dance studio is a tiny box. And in the box is a secret or a mystery, is something that you need. And so you could create how you got halfway across the floor, how you were feeling. And then you would open the box, and for some of us, the tiny box, because then we were in magic space because of her, what she allowed. you open the tiny box and sometimes a much bigger box would come out of the tiny box, or these different things could happen, as you can imagine. And I opened my box, and there was this beautiful little bird that said, I just want to sing. Just want to sing. And that was one of those moments where the nonverbal part of me that felt I had to stay nonverbal to stay close to how I was really feeling under the table. And the verbal part of me that had learned from my intellectual parents and university and graduate school, etc., where they could come together and really sing more. That was another example of that. And I did sing as a child, and then I stopped. And so I started singing again and bringing more voice into my movement workshops with people, because songs bring people together too, as you know, from time immemorial, and improvising them so everyone has a voice.
It sounds like everything you share is very passionate and fond and really lovely. But the next place I want to kind of journey into is a fond memory of studying dance therapy that you can share.
Well, those memories are very fond for me.
Mm-hmm.
Many things come to mind, but a couple that I'll mention. When I was training in authentic movement with Janet Adler,
Mm-hmm.
because she moved from the East Coast, so this was in the mid 80s, and we just kind of went from there into the 90s together. And she and we together were all experimenting with the ingredients of authentic movement that she learned from Mary Whitehouse. And of course, Mary Whitehouse was a teacher of Joan Charros for many, many years as well. So I was getting these different influences and different grandmothers. And at one point, Janet created a third position: the mover, the witness, who's sitting and holding space so the mover can close his or her eyes and be moved from the inside, from various layers of the unconscious over time in safety,
Mm-hmm.
so that really surprising things can come up. As you know, memories, things you've actually experienced, and dream bits and potentials of all kinds, sound. And then she said, let's have a silent witness. So when it came time to share, for the mover to, draw and write after their experience and then come to their witness and speak about whatever they wanted to speak about, and the witness would ask permission, is it okay if I reflect back some things I saw and felt in my own body in your presence, so there's no interpretation or judgment, just their lived experience, being with, holding space for. So they would share, and then there was a silent witness who wouldn't say anything. And I just felt it was like a sacred triangle in a way, that this quiet person was holding each person and the couple in consciousness. And it gave us all a chance to rotate through that third position of forgetting all you know, forgetting all you've learned, forgetting any smart interpretations, forgetting, and just being present, not just. And that reminded me of my Zazen training and other things. So more started to integrate there. And then with Joan, my beloved colleague Neela Hayes, who passed away some years ago from cancer, she and I started a place called the Authentic Movement Institute, where we trained some generations of people wanting to learn authentic movement and to teach it. And we invited Janet and Joan to come in and be senior faculty with us. And Joan was married to Dr. Lou Stewart, a Jungian analyst. We asked each of them, what do you want to teach? We were so excited to have them with us and to be working together. And Joan and Lou Stewart created a class in active imagination, which is a lot of what Trudy does, from raw material, letting the unconscious open up and giving it form, and then experimenting with it, relating to it like you would to a dream figure, and then living it. These are steps to active imagination. We would do that with Joan and Lou, and then the seminar after we closed the institute, I think it was, from 2003 or so to 2014, we continued the seminar in Joan and Lou's dance studio and library, and it goes on to this day. So there are a group of dance therapists who've been meeting since 1992, and we take turns. So Joan has been holding space, and each time we take turns with each of us presenting on a form of dance therapy, trauma work, neuroscience, breath work, voice, child development, dream work, archetypal psychology, Jungian all of this. And then we move and witness together. So we take everything from here, and then we just let it drop in, and we take turns moving and witnessing to see what's true now in the body. And I've had so many very moving experiences there. And one of the things that Joan had us do was to create a choreography like Trudy. So you might take a gesture that you remember from your whole movement sequence of 15 or 20 minutes, a gesture that stands out to you. So I'm just kind of doing this, I guess, because I'm offering these things. Thank you for receiving them, Jacelyn. Yeah. And then my dear friend Nancy is over here, and she might be doing, something kind of rhythmic, or, and Sandy might be doing this, and Cynthia might be doing this, and Linda might be doing this, and, we're all doing these different things. And then at the end, we might put them together and have a choreography that helps you feel far more connected to each other and helps the movement evolve. So here we are, the dancers in all of us, taking what's coming up from the unconscious in the moment and working with it, creating more unity inside and together as a community. So these are some of my favorites.
Yeah, I could imagine the longevity of the relationship and community of that group you're speaking about is in and of itself an amazing thing to be a part of, I would imagine.
It's
I
one of the great treasures in my life. I'm so grateful because we all work with so many clients and students, and I really love that. I'm passionate about it. And to have, for each of us, wherever it is, our own therapy, analysis, dance group. So this is one of my sacred places where I can just totally let my hair hang out and be myself. See what's there.
I love that you shared how it comes into fruition of each of you taking something from the unconscious and then piecing them together and creating like a more whole story and community from that. And I selfishly enjoy it because I do that in my dance therapy sessions, right, with all of my patients, where we kind of improv on our own time, and then I say, what's your salient bit? What's something you want to offer to the group? And then we may or may not interpret it or name it or narrate it, and oftentimes we do, and then we piece them together to see how we have come together in community through a shared story or narration. And it's just a lovely process, right?
Beautiful. Yeah. It's great to hear.
Yeah, it's nice to hear these stories and to share them with you and to know that, I might be doing one or two things right in my own practice.
Absolutely. and more and more
Maybe,
and
maybe,
more.
perhaps.
Actually, there's another person I want to give credit to, and that is
Sure.
Marian Woodman. She's a Jungian analyst and somebody who's worked with the body and what she called the sacred feminine and masculine. She worked a lot with gender stereotypes and opening a lot of things up. And I trained and then after a while taught, collaborated with her since the 80s, so she was another major teacher of mine. And speaking of the verbal and nonverbal, she worked with Mary Hamilton, who worked with the Royal Canadian Ballet and then got sort of out of ballet. She loved ballet, but also opened that up with other forms of movement. And then Anne Skinner, who was the head of voice of the Shakespeare Company in Stratford, Ontario. And Annie would bring in the voice, and she would have us make masks of our dream figures.
Mm.
And then Mary would help us learn how to move like the dream figures. And then Marian would have a shadow party where our masked dream figures would learn how to interact with each other. So these were parts of the self that we had kept under, that were trying to come through in our dreams, that helped us become more whole. So I'd like to honor her too. And there's a lot of cross referencing with all of these people discovering things. I'm thinking of the playfulness of your people in your group coming together to offer a treasure, for
Mm-hmm.
everyone and finding a way to do it together.
Yeah, so much collaboration and so many people to honor and pay respects to as we learn from so many people and we collaborate with so many people. And I our clients and our patients are certainly right up there on my list, right, of the people that I learn from and the people that I collaborate with as well. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
teach us so much.
They do. They certainly do. So I'm going to shift a little into a question that some folks find to be quite large. So what I am very interested in is thinking about like the salient points or tenets of dance therapy that make it what it is. And I'm wondering if you could think about formulating some thoughts around what the essence of dance therapy would be as you understand it from Trudy Schoop.
I'll probably be underscoring some things that I've shared.
Mm-hmm.
I would say embodiment, embodiment, embodiment. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so finding gravity, she would stomp if people were, whether we were dissociated, which we can all be at various times, or whether someone was dealing with schizophrenia or some other major altered state. She would say, let's go, and she would get us, them, everyone in the body. Um, I think the bridge between the conscious and the unconscious is a very important aspect. And the body and dreams both help us do that. By dreams, I don't mean only the sleepy time dreams, yes, those, but also the daydreams we have, the creative imaginations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Trudy worked with all the elements of dance, with rhythm, with time and space, as I mentioned, with repetition,
Mm-hmm.
with getting in touch with your heartbeat, with feeling the universal heartbeat with the drum, um, where, I remember doing some teaching with Joan in Cape Town, and um, at one point there was a drumming circle, and one of the people said, um, the drum is the heartbeat of the mother,
Mm-hmm.
of the Mother Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same as our pulse, and it's the same. So if we get dysregulated, or the person standing on either side of us gets dysregulated, that central heartbeat can help bring us back to a deeper humanity. I think Trudy's, her humility, her openness, again, presence. So learning how to see a bit more clearly. We have all this training in Laban and dance notation and effort shape and witnessing practice. I think it's just there to help us be able to be as present as we can and see another as clearly as we can and do our own therapy and our own dance so that we're open to what it is that's happening in the space. And that we, also have a commitment to working on our own stuff as it comes up, since learning is lifelong. And as you were saying, everyone we meet has so much to teach us, individually and cross-culturally. And boy, do we need that now, with our planet. So these are some of, community building. Trudy called us the connecting to the global self. I think she was way ahead of her time, and I think we're all global citizens now, and we need to connect to the global self. There's so much division and polarization, and so when we're out of our body, we can do terrible things to ourselves and to each other, as we know. But when we're more in our body, we can relate. We understand the suffering of another person. We feel the joy in the room. And we're not afraid to connect with that and to begin to play again. Children have so much to teach us when they play naturally. So I think that play is another important element of dance therapy. And finding ways to allow the emotions to be present and genuine and to fulfill themselves, fulfilling seed gestures, fulfilling bits of life that want to be lived.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So earlier, Tina, you talked a little bit about some of the collaborative work that you had with some of your teachers, mentors, colleagues. Wondering if there's a particular patient experience that was meaningful to you that you would like to share with us.
So many, so many beautiful people come to mind. And as you were saying, the courage to open to this work is very moving. I want to tell you about a blunder that I made, and then and then a lot that I learned from it.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and then maybe about another element. So, part of my training was at a place called Langley Porter, which is part of UCSF here. They had a locked psychiatric unit, and there was a beautiful music therapist. I know you're working with a music therapist now named Fran Goldberg, and so we would work with music and movement. And on one occasion, when I was doing a group on my own, I was trying to figure out how to use language to help people get more in their body. And I said something like, feeling the spaciousness in your belly. I was hoping that it would help people breathe more deeply. And I was quite young, and I was experimenting as we do. And one woman just kind of went, ah, like that. She just, got really upset. And I thought, what did I do? What happened? And she said, now I have a space in my belly, and I can see right through it. And I don't know how to fix it. And because she was thinking very concretely because of her schizophrenia that she was struggling with. And so when I used words like that, at that moment, it didn't occur to me. it seemed to work for other people, but not for her.
Right.
So I became that much more aware of the importance of language and metaphor. And so from there, I think I went into, oh, I can imagine, how upsetting that is. And what if we all put our hands on our bellies and just feel the warmth of our hand, and put your hand wherever else, the other one, wherever else would feel good to meet yourself. And she, let's feel our feet and make a little eye contact if you can, or if you want to. You don't have to, but just feel your feet and let yourself breathe. And she did calm.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned a lot from that. Another experience that made me smile, which was also about schizophrenia, was that we had a disruption on the unit in another psychiatric hospital where I worked. And there was a lot of tension in the air. There were things going on in the news. And a patient threw a chair through one of the windows. So everybody got upset. So I offered to do a relaxation group. So I took people downstairs and just sort of talked them through the body and the breath and the ground. And as I'll call him Jack, as Jack came in, he looked really upset. And I liked him so much. And I said, "How are you doing?" And he goes, "Not very good. I have a nickel in my belly." And I said, "Oh, well, would it be okay to lie down, or do you want to stand or sit, or just let yourself be comfortable?" And he did lay down, and we went through the group. People got a lot more grounded. On the way out, he had a huge smile. And I said, "What happened? It looks like, something was good for you." And he leaned over and whispered in my ear, "Yeah, now it's a quarter." So I was like, "Oh," so something had increased in value. And then he threw his arms around me and gave me a hug. And so it was just like being invited into these magical worlds where things are not what they seem, but human to human, you get it. And then I'll just say briefly, in my private practice, years later, there was a woman who went through a lot of abuse, and this was much harder, and had so many physical symptoms. And one of them was a big rash that came up around her watch and her wedding ring. And I found out how much abuse was going on with her husband. So it was remarkable that the rash was, in this case, coming up around how much time she'd been married. These
Wow.
symbolic things. And she was very ashamed of it, and she kept hiding it. And at a certain point, after a little bit of trust, I said, would it be okay to see? And she actually extended her hands and let me touch her hands. And then we worked with grounding later, and rhythm, and boundaries, the things we know in our work, pushing away, finding her no voice,
Yeah.
making eye contact, feeling more present. And she was someone who was allergic to lying down and relaxing because of the trauma. But over time, she was gradually able to do it. And I invited her to put her hands on her belly, and she started to shake her head no. And then when her belly started to open up more, she was shaking her head yes, and her whole body started to connect more. And she spontaneously remembered a dream that she had had. This is awful, Jacelyn, but of cats whose heads had been taken off. And as she remembered it, she said, "I feel like that's what happened to me." And she started moving her head and her whole body. And I extended my hands, and she took them and pushed against them, and she started crying, and then she said, I can feel the warmth of your hands, and I can feel your heartbeat, and now I can feel my heartbeat.
Mm.
And so she really started to come into her own and got strong enough to leave him and became an artist. She started doing
Mm.
self-portraits and
Oh,
sharing them with me so she could see herself
yeah.
over time. And then she started
Mm.
helping adolescent girls do drawings,
Mm.
um, so that their feminine, which I think of with cats sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
could really come through and get more healed.
Mm. I love that she started doing self-portraits, like this externalization and tangibility of self that comes from the process, right? In dance, I always think about in dance therapy, we don't have a takeaway. We are body as vehicle, and in art, there is a tangible, there can be a tangible object to take with you, and
Yes.
that her tangible object was herself, was her. Mm-hmm. Oh, how beautiful. Mm.
Thank you. She felt like she didn't exist before,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because of all the
Mm-hmm.
abuse. She sort of
Of
disappeared and
course.
hid out and got all these symptoms. So it was beautiful to see her appear and, as you said,
Mm-hmm.
have something to take with her and build over time a
Mm-hmm.
sense of
Yeah.
self.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And actually, Trudy would say, building a sense of yourself that has more strength and flexibility and range of motion,
Mm-hmm.
all the senses, so that you can deal with life's slings and arrows and
Mm-hmm.
gifts and
Mm-hmm.
struggles. Um, that we're able to live life more fully.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
You know, there's one more thing I'd love to share about Trudy. I don't know if we have a,
Sure. Mm-hmm.
is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Um, she was a social activist, and I remember her saying at one point that how valuable her performing was, how much she loved it, um, and at the same time, it wasn't until she started working more with orphans during the war and with people in psychiatric hospitals, and then bringing the political activist element into her dance theater, that she
Mm-hmm.
felt like she knew why she was here. And one of the things that we know about Trudy is that she was very obsessive as a child. So she her sister told her a family secret that was about abuse, not someone in the family, but and then told her, like many people do, don't tell. And so Trudy inherited the secret, and it just was so upsetting to her that she didn't know what to do with it. And her father was the editor of the main newspaper there. And so he was writing about things going on in the world, and they would hear about this at the dinner table. Her parents were incredibly supportive. And her mother was all about freedom and was talking about things that were needed in the world. And so this was also part of the background. So Trudy closed herself in her room and she started dancing her feelings that she couldn't express with words. And she was also dealing with this compulsion of turning the doorknob in increments of 3, 6, 9, 12, going up until she'd get up to like 80 or 80, 81. And the same thing with ringing the doorbell. But she realized she couldn't ring the doorbell 81 times, so she mimed it 80 times, and then she rang it on the 81st time. And it was through working with these gestures and refining them that she developed her mime approach.
Mm-hmm.
So then going forward, she's in a cabaret and she's working with her dance company that she put together. and it's during the war, and they are finding a secret language to communicate about what's going on with the Nazis in Germany at that time. And they would get, so they're pantomiming and they're amplifying, they're trying to show with their bodies things that are happening. And they would get tipped off if there was going to be a Nazi officer who was coming or someone from the press, and they would suddenly change their program to plan B. And there they would do these gestures like Hitler's forelock, you
Mm-hmm.
know, or make a movement for the mustache, or they would mime things that they couldn't really be accused of doing anything wrong. And these were to packed houses, at a time when, people couldn't really gather and speak about these things. But she said, I wanted to use my art as a vehicle to promote healthy, just social values.
Mm-hmm.
There is an experience that Joan told me about that Trudy shared with her. Um,
Joan Chodorow,
Joan Chodorow. Shall I mention that?
if you'd like, yeah.
Okay. It's an emblem of Trudy's courage.
Mm.
So after one of these performances, this time in Berlin, as the war is getting started, people were still moving back and forth. Trudy had a beautiful performance, and there was an SS officer who invited her to come back to talk with the lead SS person there. And she didn't know what it was about, but he said, you need to come with me. And so he took her down a long corridor, and they were all doing the Heil Hitler salute, which I'm not going to do. And she, using her mime and humor part of herself and just being open in her own way, said in her Schweizerdeutsch, oh, hello there, hello there, hello there, as she went past each of these people.
Mm-hmm.
And then she got in with the chief officer, and he said, welcome, we love your work, and we would like to build a major theater to you and have you be the person who is our kind of our national treasure, doing mime and theater basically for the Third Reich. And she was shocked. And he said, there's just one thing. You have to fire your dark haired, dark eyed dancers. And she said, I couldn't possibly do that. They're among my best dancers. I couldn't possibly do that. And furthermore, I don't agree with any of your policies. And he said, we know how much you make. We know where you live. If you don't fire your Jewish and Gypsy dancers, I cannot guarantee your safety. And he had also promised her tons of money and basically said, I have an offer that you can't refuse. She was terrified, but she had her composure. And he's a huge guy in an officer's uniform. And she's herself, but powerful in her own right. And she says, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I don't agree with any of your social policies. And she left, and she was terrified. She had a really hard time sleeping. She thought of calling all of her dancers and saying, this is what's happening. We have to leave right now. Instead, she waited till morning. She called the Swiss embassy. She told them what had happened. And they said in a very organized they said in a very Swiss way, this is Trudy, you have to show up at the theater. You have to be there for your commitment. And if the theater is locked, we will organize a train and we will accompany you in safety back to Switzerland with all of your dancers. They showed up on time to do the theater performance. The theater was all locked up, and the people from the embassy showed up. They took them on the train and they brought them back to safety to Switzerland, without any of their costumes or scenery. They put so much into making these things and they didn't have it. And Trudy said, we really need these things to do our craft. And so the Swiss government petitioned the German government, and they came back about 2 months later completely in shreds.
Mm.
So this is another aspect of Trudy, of a woman who completely lived her values,
Mm-hmm.
who stood up against very powerful forces and could reach every possible kind of human being, right where they lived. So she had this tremendous range, and dance and mime and her heart and soul were her major tools.
Mm-hmm. Mm, so beautiful. Mm. Thank you. I'm glad you took the space to share that. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for hearing it.
Of course.
There's so much that goes on in our world that needs us to remain conscious and
Mm-hmm.
embodied.
Yeah.
As you know, or we can get quite traumatized and thrown off and even go into mass, group psychologies and splinter and have news and fake news.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the lessons that, many of our grandparents and our ancestors found ways to get through when the world was in really troubled times can really help us now, you
Mm-hmm.
know, if we can remember, and stay embodied ourselves and connected with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This leads perfectly into the last question that I have. And thinking about knowledge and holding on to knowledge, what is it about dance therapy that you would like to see carried into the future of dance therapy as it transitions?
The integrative nature of it, that it brings in all of the senses, that it brings in the literal experience of the embodied self, that it brings in the imagination, the work with the creative unconscious, dreaming, a sense of the collective, that we're not alone, that we're all in this together. In a way, the virus we're all struggling with is an opportunity for us to feel we're
Mm-hmm.
all impacted. We could come together instead of polarizing. And that the more we're in touch with our own bodies, I think the more we can be in contact with each other, here around the world, with our colleagues from many, many cultures and all of their native dances, all of their ancestral roots, with respect,
Mm-hmm.
and richness. And the more we can stay connected with our bodies, and this takes me back to how we started, Jacelyn,
Mm-hmm.
fields, the more we can be connected with the planet,
Mm-hmm.
with the Earth's body. Um, and if we're not connected, we can do a lot of things to our bodies, and and to the planet without even thinking.
Mm-hmm.
When we are connected, we can feel that oneness, and we want to support all of the species and all the people on the planet and the vitality of the earth, which is so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you've shared so much, but I do want to give space if there's anything that I haven't asked about that you would like to share before we close up our time together.
I thought about sharing a short poem that ends with a line that Trudy used a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and it's by Hafiz, a great mystical poet, It's called The God Who Only Knows 4 Words. Every child has known God. And by God, we could say Sophia, Buddha, the creative life force, the soulfulness in each of us. So he says, every child has known God, not the God of names, not the God of don'ts, not the God who ever does anything weird, but the God who knows only 4 words and keeps repeating them, saying, come, dance with me. Come, dance.
Hmm. Well, I am going to invite you in this moment to come dance with me.
Oh,
So if you will accept an invitation, I would love for us to just spend a moment moving together. And of course, I'll be here. You can see me. They will see you. We will invite many people to come dance with us.
thank you. I'd love
Yeah,
to. I'd love to.
perfect.
So I'm going to move my chair. Are we dancing in our chairs or standing?
It's your call. I will join you wherever you would prefer to be.
Maybe standing.
Yeah.
Okay. Does that work?
Yes.
So, do you want to take turns leading and following, or how do you want to do it?
It's all you. I'm just here. I'm here to join the ride. Whatever you would like to do, I will
Oh,
be
oh.
present with as well.
Oh. And Jacelyn, if you want,
Yes.
imagine a little tiny box and just let it be there and see. Well, actually, it can be any size you want, of course. And just let yourself play with it. We're just honoring Trudy here and see what happens. Oh, did something come to you?
It was just a little kind of puff of light that came out.
Beautiful.
Mhm.
I'm seeing the warm color of your shirt as you say that, of your sweater. And here I remembered the little bird who was there long ago with Trudy, and I wondered if she would still be there. I didn't really know. And what came out this time um, was a beautiful flower.
Mm.
Yeah, a peony. You know how they have all those
Mhm.
layers of,
Mhm.
of beautiful tissue and layers. So
Yeah.
um, So that feels like a gift. And I also want to offer that to you.
Thank
This
you.
beautiful peony. Thank you so much for what you're doing with
Oh,
all of us in
yeah.
helping to archive
Hmm.
our ancestors and what we learned from them and from each
Hmm.
other. And as you said, from our patients and students and all the people we have the privilege to meet and work with.
Hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tina, it's been such an honor to talk with you. And I just want to also acknowledge the warmth that you brought to me and to this process, and um, the range of emotions that I really were very visceral for me throughout, and how powerful this was. I'm just very honored to talk with you and to have you share these stories. So I just want to thank you so, so much for your time and your wisdom and your sharing and your generosity. I really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much. I'm very
Thank you.
excited by your project,
Oh,
Move.
thank
Can't
you.
wait to see all of them
Me
and share in
too.
our community. Keep sharing in our community. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.